Most people will never be financially free because they are trapped in a cycle of fear and conditioned thinking that starts long before they ever earn their first paycheck, and it begins with the belief that money is scarce, that wealth is only for the lucky, or the educated, or the morally superior, and from childhood they are taught to chase security rather than freedom, to obey rules rather than question systems, to conform rather than create, and this programming drives them to trade the most valuable asset they have, time, for money in ways that never allow compounding, that never allow ownership, and they confuse working hard with working smart, believing that staying busy is the same as progressing, when in reality being busy can be the fastest path to exhaustion and debt, and they are constantly seduced by consumerism, by instant gratification, by the endless parade of advertisements that whisper that buying things will make them happy or complete or respected, which is a lie that keeps them financially shackled because the more they consume, the more they spend, the more debt they take on, and the less they think about building assets that generate passive income, and alongside that they are paralyzed by fear, fear of investing, fear of taking risks, fear of losing what little they have, fear of stepping outside their comfort zones, which prevents them from ever learning about money in depth, from ever experimenting with financial strategies that could free them, from ever understanding the true mechanics of wealth creation, and they rely on external validation from their peers, bosses, and social media instead of cultivating internal discipline and self-education. And this lack of financial literacy means they are blind to opportunities all around them, unaware of how compounding, leverage, and entrepreneurial thinking work, unaware of how assets can work for them while they sleep, while liabilities drain their energy and their money, and they are shackled further by the invisible chains of societal expectations that tell them to follow the safe path of a fixed salary, a house, a car, a family, a routine, while discouraging any form of creative thinking or financial risk. And in this way, year after year, paycheck after paycheck, their dreams of financial freedom are postponed, until eventually those dreams fade entirely, leaving behind a life of mediocrity, constant stress, and the illusion of choice, because freedom is not something that happens to you. It is something you earn through relentless learning, courageous action, patience, and the ability to see beyond short-term pleasure and instant gratification. And yet most people are too distracted, too tired, too comfortable in their excuses, too enslaved by their emotions, and too unaware of the true principles of money to ever break free. And this is why the majority of the population will never experience the liberation of financial independence, will never feel the quiet power of waking up knowing your time is truly yours, and will never understand that real wealth is not the accumulation of things, but the accumulation of choices, options, and control over your life, and that the path to financial freedom is lonely, it is full of mistakes, it is unglamorous, it requires patience that most people have been denied by instant gratification culture, it requires sacrifice that society tells them is unnecessary or foolish, and it requires thinking in terms of years and decades rather than weeks and months, and until they confront their fears, educate themselves relentlessly, take ownership of their financial reality, and reject the illusions of consumerist society, they will remain trapped, watching the world of financial freedom pass them by as they work tirelessly for money that only buys temporary relief from the anxiety of scarcity. And this is the brutal truth that few are willing to admit to themselves, and the reason why most people will never break the cycle, will never taste the kind of freedom that allows them to live life on their own terms, will never understand that the only person who can free them from financial bondage is themselves, and that it is not luck, inheritance, or connections that determine wealth but mindset, action, and discipline. And until that moment of awakening happens, they will remain stuck, running in circles, paying bills, chasing raises, accumulating debt, and believing in illusions, never realizing that the real wealth was always within reach if only they had the courage to claim it. And as they remain trapped in this cycle, they fail to see that financial freedom is not about money alone. It is about mindset, habits, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Yet most people never invest in understanding money beyond the superficial lessons of school or the cliches spoon-fed by mainstream media. They never read books on wealth. They never analyze their spending patterns with brutal honesty. They never ask themselves why they make financial decisions and whether those decisions move them closer to freedom or deeper into bondage, and instead they follow the herd, believing that working harder, saving a little, and hoping for a promotion is enough. But it is never enough because financial freedom demands more than effort. It demands strategy, foresight, and the courage to embrace discomfort. And discomfort is something most people avoid at all costs. They avoid risk. They avoid learning from mistakes. They avoid confronting their financial ignorance. They avoid delaying gratification. They avoid doing the things that will separate them from the masses. And this avoidance keeps them locked in jobs they despise, paying bills they cannot escape, and trading their most valuable resource, time, for fleeting pleasures, while watching others take calculated risks, invest, create businesses, leverage knowledge and networks, and build wealth that grows exponentially. And this comparison fuels envy and despair rather than motivation, because they do not understand the principles behind the wealth they see. They only see the result, the visible success, not the countless hours of learning, failing, and persisting behind the scenes. And so they cling to excuses like the economy, luck, education, or the government, when the truth is that freedom is possible in any economy, with any background, with any starting point, if they are willing to commit fully, sacrifice temporarily, and act relentlessly. But action is what most people never take. They are immobilized by analysis paralysis, by fear of judgment, by the comfort of routine, by the seductive ease of staying safe. And in staying safe, they are actually choosing a slow form of death for their dreams. Because life passes relentlessly, time is finite, opportunities are fleeting, and while they waste years waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect plan, others are quietly building their future, taking small but consistent steps, learning through trial and error, investing time and money into skills, assets, and knowledge that compound over years into freedom. And this is the difference. The chasm between the financially free and the financially trapped is not luck or connections. It is courage, discipline, patience, and the willingness to think long-term in a world obsessed with short-term comfort. And yet the majority remain blind to this reality, distracted by screens, entertainment, social validation, and temporary pleasures, and they confuse consumption with happiness, immediate satisfaction with progress, and survival with thriving. And so their life becomes a series of compromises, a daily grind where they trade health, time, and energy for money that is never enough. And each month they are forced to repeat the cycle, paycheck to bills to debt to paycheck, while their dreams shrink under the weight of excuses, responsibilities, and fear. And they do not understand that financial freedom is a marathon, not a sprint. It is built through compound effort, repeated learning, calculated risk, and the willingness to endure discomfort and uncertainty. Yet most people are unwilling to endure anything beyond what is comfortable. And so they live a life of quiet desperation, thinking they are working toward freedom, when in reality they are working toward survival. And this is why the gap widens between those who achieve independence and those who do not, why wealth becomes concentrated in the hands of the few, why the majority remain enslaved by debt, poor habits, and limiting beliefs. And this truth is often painful, almost unbearable to accept, because it forces self-reflection, it forces accountability, and most people are trained from birth to avoid accountability, to blame external forces, to find comfort in mediocrity, and to fear the very things that could liberate them. And so they repeat the same mistakes, fail to learn from the past, ignore opportunities, and unknowingly sabotage themselves with every choice, every purchase, every decision made without thought. And the tragic irony is that financial freedom is not complicated. It is not reserved for a select few. It is available to anyone who understands the rules, takes responsibility for their actions, and is willing to do what others refuse to do. But because the path requires persistence, courage, delayed gratification, disciplined learning, and relentless action, most people will never commit, most will never endure, most will never break the chains that keep them bound to a life of financial limitation. And so they live out their days dreaming of freedom, while remaining prisoners of fear, habit, distraction, and societal conditioning. And this is the silent tragedy of the human condition in relation to money, that the majority of people never realize their potential because they never understand the true cost of inaction, the immense value of time, and the power that comes from taking ownership of their financial destiny. And until they awaken to this reality, they will continue to be caught in a cycle that feels normal, safe, and inevitable, not realizing that every day they wait is a day lost. Every decision made without purpose strengthens their chains, and every year passed without action pushes financial freedom further away. And the harsh truth remains that while wealth and freedom are accessible, attainable, and logical, they are not easy, they are not passive, and they are not for those unwilling to confront their fears, habits, and excuses. And this is why most people will never know the liberation, the peace, the autonomy, and the joy that comes with financial independence, because it demands a level of mental clarity, emotional discipline, and persistent action that only a few are willing to pursue. A pursuit that is lonely, uncomfortable, challenging, and full of setbacks, but ultimately the only path that leads to true freedom. And as they continue living this cycle, day after day, paycheck after paycheck, they fail to see the simple truth that financial freedom is a mindset before it is money. It is vision before it is currency. It is discipline before it is wealth. And most people never cultivate these things because they are distracted by comfort, entertainment, social approval, and the false security of routine. And in doing so, they trade their dreams for a life that is predictable but unfulfilling, safe but unremarkable. And in this safety they unknowingly suffocate their potential, their creativity, their ambition, and their chance at true independence. Because true financial freedom requires thinking differently from the masses, acting differently, and embracing discomfort that others avoid. And this is why it is so rare, why so few achieve it, why the majority remain bound to jobs, debts, bills, and a life that feels like survival rather than thriving. And yet the saddest part is that the tools, knowledge, and strategies to break free are widely available. They are just ignored, misunderstood, or rejected because they require effort, patience, and courage, things most people are unwilling to give. And so they cling to myths, shortcuts, and excuses, believing that wealth is a result of luck, inheritance, or timing, when in reality, wealth is a result of choices, discipline, learning, and relentless action. And the harsh reality is that this choice is made every single day in small decisions, whether to save or spend, to learn or scroll mindlessly, to invest or procrastinate, to confront fear or seek comfort. And each small choice compounds over years into either freedom or continued bondage. And most people make the wrong choice every time because they are guided by emotion, habit, and society's narrative rather than knowledge, reason, and long-term vision. And this is why they remain trapped, why they never break the cycle, why their lives feel like running on a treadmill, constantly moving but never arriving, never experiencing the autonomy, joy, and security that come with financial independence. And they are too distracted to notice that every passing day is a step further from freedom, too distracted to learn, too distracted to act, too distracted to reflect. And in this distraction, their dreams die quietly, unnoticed, unfulfilled, and they are left with only regrets, wondering where time went, why they never achieved more, why they never broke free, why life feels heavier and narrower than they imagined. And the answer is painfully simple. They never chose freedom, they never prioritized it, they never endured for it. And until they do, they will remain prisoners of their own habits, fears, and society's conditioning. And this is the tragic truth that most will never admit, because admitting it requires accountability, self-reflection, courage, and action. And admitting it forces a choice that many are too afraid to make, a choice that means stepping out of comfort, risking failure, defying social norms, and embracing uncertainty. And yet, this is exactly what separates the few who achieve financial freedom from the many who do not. This willingness to act when others freeze, to sacrifice when others indulge, to learn when others ignore, to persist when others quit, and to see opportunity when others see obstacles. And this mindset is rare, it is cultivated, it is developed over years of consistent effort, over decades of learning, from mistakes, over a lifetime of intentional decisions. And yet it is accessible to anyone willing to commit, willing to endure, willing to prioritize freedom above fleeting pleasures. And most people are not willing. Most people never are. Most people never will be. And this unwillingness condemns them to a life of mediocrity, of stress, of working for money rather than making money work for them, of trading their time, energy, and dreams for temporary relief from scarcity, for the illusion of comfort, for a sense of normalcy that keeps them safe but also keeps them chained. And this is why most people will never experience what it truly feels like to wake up each day with choices, options, control, and autonomy, to feel empowered rather than trapped, to live with intention rather than by default, to create wealth that multiplies while they sleep rather than vanish with every month, to enjoy the quiet peace of financial security that allows them to focus on purpose, creativity, relationships, and joy rather than bills, obligations, and stress. And yet this life is possible. It is attainable. It is within reach for anyone willing to challenge their fears, break their habits, reject societal illusions, invest in knowledge, take calculated risks, and commit to a long-term plan. A plan that requires patience, persistence, sacrifice, learning, and courage, because the road to financial freedom is lonely, uncomfortable, challenging, unglamorous, and full of setbacks, but Every setback is a lesson, every discomfort is a teacher, every sacrifice compounds into freedom, and every disciplined action moves the individual one step closer to the liberation that most will never taste, to a life of options, control, and true independence. And the tragedy is that while freedom is available, accessible, and logical, it requires effort that most refuse to give, courage that most lack, patience that most abandon, and vision that most never develop, and so they remain trapped, watching others live freely while they themselves endure quietly, working tirelessly for money that only buys temporary relief, never realizing that the true wealth they seek is a product of mindset, discipline, education, and action, and not luck, inheritance, or timing. And until this realization hits with clarity and intensity, most will continue to make the same choices, live the same patterns, and remain in bondage to the very system that they believe is their only path to survival. And this is why most people will never be financially free, why most people will never wake up with the power to choose their day, why most people will never experience the joy of time, money, and energy aligned toward purpose and passion, why most people will never understand that freedom is created, not found, that wealth is built, not inherited, that life is lived fully, not passively, and that the only person who can free them from financial chains is themselves. And yet, despite all of this, most people continue to live as though financial freedom is something distant, something that happens to others, something that requires luck, privilege, or extraordinary circumstances, and they fail to see that the real barrier is themselves, their habits, their mindset, their choices, and every day that passes without deliberate action is another day of missed opportunity, another day where dreams shrink under the weight of distraction, consumerism, and conformity. And this is why they remain trapped in the loop of working to pay bills, working to pay debts, working to fund fleeting pleasures, always chasing what they do not have, always comparing themselves to others, always believing that tomorrow will somehow fix what they are unwilling to fix today. And tomorrow never comes because life is relentless, time is finite, and while they wait for permission, clarity, or luck, the days, months, and years slip through their fingers, leaving behind nothing but regret, frustration, and a gnawing sense of incompleteness, and they are conditioned to think that stability is enough, that comfort is safety, that a fixed routine is protection. But these illusions of security are precisely what prevent them from ever achieving independence, because real freedom is not found in a paycheck, it is not found in a title, it is not found in a house, a car, or status symbols. It is found in knowledge, in strategy, in control, in options, and in the ability to live life on one's own terms. And this is the terrifying truth that most refuse to confront, that the only thing standing between them and financial freedom is themselves, their habits, their fears, their excuses, and yet, paradoxically, the very thing that traps them can also set them free, if they are willing to take ownership, to learn relentlessly, to act consistently, and to endure discomfort that others avoid. And this path is not glamorous, it is not easy, it is not instant, it requires patience that feels unnatural in a world of immediate gratification. It requires sacrifice that society tells you is unnecessary, foolish, or painful. It requires thinking in terms of years and decades rather than days and months. It requires embracing uncertainty, taking calculated risks, and developing resilience that most never cultivate. And this is why only a few ever reach it, why wealth and freedom are concentrated in the hands of those willing to think, learn, and act differently, while the majority remain entrapped in their patterns of fear, ignorance, and distraction. And yet the tools, the principles, the strategies are available to anyone willing to pay attention, willing to educate themselves, willing to act, and yet they remain ignored, dismissed, or feared, because real change demands courage, consistency, and the willingness to endure discomfort without guarantee of immediate results. And this is precisely what most people are unwilling to do. Unwilling to endure, unwilling to sacrifice, unwilling to think long-term, unwilling to confront the harsh truths about their habits, choices, and reality. And so they remain in the same loop, repeating patterns, reinforcing fear, reinforcing limitation, and quietly resigning themselves to a life that is smaller than they imagined, a life that is less than what they are capable of, a life dictated by bills, obligations, social expectations, and the invisible chains of their own making. And in this resignation, they fail to understand that financial freedom is less about money than about mindset, less about luck than about persistence, less about external circumstances than about internal discipline, less about waiting for permission than about taking responsibility, less about avoiding discomfort than about learning to thrive through it. And the tragedy is that every moment they spend avoiding these truths is a moment spent building a life of limitation rather than expansion, a life of constraint rather than freedom, a life of dependence rather than autonomy. And this is why, despite the opportunities, despite the knowledge, despite the resources, despite the logic and simplicity of wealth-building principles, the majority will never experience financial liberation because they refuse to endure the short-term discomfort necessary for long-term gain, because they choose temporary relief over permanent freedom, because they choose distraction over focus, consumption over creation, comfort over courage, and in doing so they trade a life of possibility for a life of quiet struggle, subtle despair, and unfulfilled potential. And this is the harsh reality that few admit, few confront, and even fewer act upon. But those who do understand that freedom is not given, it is earned, that wealth is not found, it is created, that life is not survived, it is mastered, and that the journey is never glamorous, never easy, and never free of challenges, but every step taken with intention, discipline, and courage compounds over time into a life that is expansive, autonomous, and liberating, a life that most only dream of but never attain, a life that requires thinking, learning, acting, sacrificing, enduring, and persisting in ways that most refuse, a life that is fully possible, fully attainable, and fully within reach for anyone willing to claim it. And yet the truth remains that most people will never claim it, most people will never act, most people will never endure, and this is why most people will never be financially free, because freedom requires bravery, discipline, vision, patience, and relentless action, qualities that the majority are unwilling to cultivate, and until they do, they will remain trapped, repeating the same patterns, following the same scripts, living the same life, watching freedom pass them by, unaware that it was never outside of reach, only waiting for them to take responsibility, to take action, and to choose it, above all else. And as they remain trapped in these cycles, most people never stop to reflect on the choices that keep them imprisoned. They never pause to question why they spend more than they earn, why they follow trends, why they chase status instead of building real wealth, why they invest time in distractions that offer temporary pleasure but no lasting gain, why they fear failure more than they desire freedom. And this lack of self-awareness is the silent thief of their potential, quietly eroding dreams, ambitions, and possibilities. And yet, the truth is that financial freedom is not mysterious. It is not reserved for the lucky or the privileged. It is a path laid out in principles that are simple yet ignored, rules that are logical yet avoided, strategies that are accessible yet overlooked, and anyone willing to act with discipline, patience, and courage can follow this path to liberation. Yet most refuse, most delay, most procrastinate, and in their procrastination, life continues without pause. Opportunities vanish, years pass, and the chance to break free diminishes slowly but surely, and they are unaware that the very habits that feel comfortable, that feel normal, that feel safe, are in fact the chains that keep them bound, that every small decision to avoid learning, to avoid investing, to avoid taking risks, to indulge in temporary pleasures instead of building assets, compounds over time into a life that feels limiting, constrained, and powerless. And this is why the majority remain trapped, why most never experience the joy of waking up each day with options, control, and freedom, why they trade their energy, time, and creativity for money that disappears as quickly as it is earned, why they live lives dictated by obligations rather than by their own vision, why they look around and envy those who have escaped the cycle, never realizing that the escape is not luck, it is discipline, it is knowledge, it is courage, it is the deliberate choice to prioritize freedom above comfort, above entertainment, above instant gratification, above societal validation, above fear. And until they embrace this truth, until they confront their own limiting beliefs, until they develop the habits, mindset, and courage necessary, they will continue to live small, constrained, predictable lives, thinking that this is normal, thinking that this is inevitable, thinking that freedom is for someone else, never realizing that it is entirely within their reach if only they are willing to choose it, fight for it, endure discomfort for it, and act consistently toward it every single day. And this is the tragic reality that most will never see, that the very thing that keeps them safe is the very thing that keeps them from thriving, that the comfort of routine is the prison of mediocrity, that the fear of change is the barrier to independence, and that every day spent avoiding responsibility, avoiding learning, avoiding action, is another day spent building a life they do not truly desire, another day that distances them from the freedom they imagine. And this is why, Despite all the opportunities, all the knowledge, all the resources available today, the majority will never achieve financial freedom because they are unwilling to endure the short-term struggle for long-term gain, unwilling to delay gratification, unwilling to act when the masses freeze, unwilling to take risks when others play it safe, unwilling to learn from failure when others quit at the first obstacle, and unwilling to think long-term when society conditions them to live for the present, and so they remain trapped, working tirelessly for money that only buys temporary relief, for a sense of normalcy that is a facade, for a life that is predictable but unfulfilling, for security that is actually limitation. And in this reality, dreams fade, ambition wanes, hope diminishes, and quietly, invisibly, a life of potential is replaced by a life of mediocrity, repetition, and quiet. Despair, and yet, the paradox is that the very habits, choices, and mindset that trap them are also the very tools that can free them, if they are willing to choose differently, if they are willing to act differently, if they are willing to endure discomfort, take risks, learn relentlessly, and commit to a long-term vision of freedom. And this is the distinction between the few who succeed and the many who fail, the few who escape and the many who remain chained, the few who live with autonomy and joy and purpose, and the many who live in stress, obligation, and limitation. And this is why the journey is lonely, why the path is challenging, why few walk it. But it is also why it is attainable, why it is logical, why it is within reach for anyone willing to take responsibility, to think long-term, to endure the process, and to persist relentlessly until freedom is achieved. And this is the brutal, beautiful, empowering, and necessary truth about financial freedom, that it is a choice. It is a habit, it is a lifestyle, it is a mindset, it is an action, it is discipline, it is learning, it is patience, it is courage, it is risk, it is sacrifice, it is vision. It is the deliberate daily commitment to building a life that is bigger, freer, and more fulfilling than the life that society, fear, and habit have conditioned most people to accept. And until individuals embrace this truth fully, they will continue to live like the majority, never knowing the joy, autonomy, control, security, and empowerment that comes from true financial independence. And this is why most people will never, ever be financially free.